truth is hard to hear, Walker, but it's time. You're all that's left, and we can't live this lie forever.
Video games can provide a new way of entertainment through their gameplay. They are relatively unique compared to other ways we spend our free time, and they offer many different possibilities how they entertain us, whether through gameplay mechanics, their story, online and social components, or the various combinations of all these elements. In this video, I want to talk more about the potential video games have displayed when it comes to gameplay mechanics, a narrative and storytelling.
Everybody else.
I will split this video in two parts for your own sake, going into more details and personal examples in the second one.
Karambit.
First, I want to differentiate between those three terms. Gameplay is the actual mechanics video game offer, and the narrative is the overall story being told. Storytelling now describes the actual way the story is being told and presented in the media, it being cutscenes, dialogues, text, or something similar. It's obvious that the narrative stands as the fundament for good storytelling in any media, and it should be said that everything discussed from now on relies on such a base with strong characters, interesting development, and unsuspected turns.
Tom.
A great example would be the first Mafia game. I still love it, but I think it's not remembered for its decent gameplay, but its great story, which could be part of any Hollywood movie.
What the hell is going on? This is ruining my lunch.
Gorilla must have nothing better to do.
They could have at least let me taste the wine.
Video games are games, so as its distinctive mark, gameplay plays the most important part when it comes to the fascination of games. It solidifies its uniqueness in comparison and stands for the most important pillar of video game elements. But something that has only come to light in the most recent years are the innovative ways of storytelling gameplay can actually provide when being experimented with.
You fucking my car? Nah, ain't no big deal.
Video games used to be quite similar to movies and their way of presenting a narrative, with cutscenes providing the story, separating different gameplay segments.
We got snipers.
Tell your men not to worry, Captain. The snipers aren't for you.
What the fuck is this?
It has only been in the recent years when developers found more and more ways how to approach storytelling in video games using its unique instruments.
We would have died long ago.
This is a test.
A reminder that the Black Mesa has...
Half-Life was one of the first milestones here. A silent character and no cutscenes don't sound like Hollywood material, and it isn't. But it still managed to tell a narrative with places like Black Mesa or the titular character Gordon Freeman becoming part of the video game cult, while being highly unlikely used in any movie.
Welcome to the HEV Mark IV.
Half-Life managed to do so by telling a story in a new way for its time, through the environmental design, non-player characters, and even the voiceless character Freeman himself. As the titular character never commented anything on screen, it was up to the players to fill up this mental void.
Yes!
It was also up to them how to interact with other innocent NPCs in Black Mesa, whether leaving them be or ruthlessly killing them, while it had no impact on the narrative or gameplay and wasn't even presented as a choice of such. It was one of the first examples of gameplay elements interacting with the before rigid narrative, as characters make up the meat of any story.
What's going on with our equipment?
Playing another big role was the environment. As no cutscenes were used to introduce the player to levels and their objective to overcome, most of the actual story had to be told through the level design. The levels were, for the time, relatively complex and filled with riddles, and players were given the task to find their way on their own. This provided a unique experience where video gamers would approach the narrative on a more personal, gamey level. Half-Life was the first time, for me, that a video game showed that it can tell a story differently using a unique approach through video game characteristics, creating the immersion of a narrative. Of course, compared to today, its level design, interactivity and choice is rather bland and strict, but back then it was ahead of its time, with more games finding their game approach towards storytelling after, away from movies. Games like Deus Ex, Morrowind and Mass Effect have since paved the way of innovative game design regarding storytelling. And today we talk about world building, non-linear narratives and individuality in character design and story path as new results of storytelling in video games. We customize ourselves, take decisions regarding approach and story continuation, and every player experiences a slightly different game as scripts become more and more abandoned, with worlds and characters dynamically reacting to us and our actions, creating the total immersion. Well, that's what many developers want us to believe, and while we are still far away from something that perfect, immersion and player attachment have become strong suits of video game storytelling today. As an example, a game like Spec Ops: The Line, while conventional regarding gameplay, it successfully manages to reveal the tragedy of brutality towards the player through storytelling. It does so by confronting us with the consequences of our own actions as the player, deconstructing the myth of heroes on a personal level of narrative.
We were helping. What?
Our actions as the main character in Spec Ops, and in some way in many other games, are questioned, and rightfully so. While there are movies and books reaching for the same message, I think this video game has found a very emotional way to connect to us, something watching a movie couldn't have achieved.
He didn't want the king. He was trying to rescue his people. This is your fault, goddammit! Stop right there, Lugo.
Going back to more mainstream titles, let us look how storytelling is utilized in some of the most famous examples of games with great stories. Blockbusters like The Witcher 3 or Dark Souls have proven that good game mechanics and a complex narrative can go hand in hand. They tell a mature fantasy story the likes of story giants as Game of Thrones, but on a more immersive and personal level. Both games are prime examples for environmental storytelling, world building, and the sometimes hidden dynamics of choice. The Witcher is massive in terms of world building, story content, and decisions to be made. Almost every quest is non-linear, they are neither black or white, but somewhere in the grey area. The themes covered are no fairy tale, as racism and war play a big role, and the consequences are not clear most of the time, only revealing themselves later in the game. It makes for a unique narrative for every player, shaping the main character not only in our heads, but also on screen.
Give me the feed.
In the oven! Throw him in the oven!
On top of that, everything takes place in a beautiful, believable world which doesn't seem to be built just for the player. The developers said themselves that the environments were created after the quests had been written, and you can see the care they took with every location you discover. The Witcher 3 is a masterpiece when it comes to non-linear storytelling and creating a believable, living world, and it can't be commended enough for its contribution. Players can and have lost themselves in the immersive world of this game. But there's another title with a different approach towards storytelling I want to talk about. Dark Souls 3 has a different take towards telling a story in a video game. I'm honest, I don't fully understand its lore and story, and probably never will, but thanks to some friends of mine, I experienced the third installment while enjoying immediate fan insight when questions would come up, and they would come up all the time. It is not a classical game presenting a conventional story. It forces you, more than others, to read item descriptions, go through fan wikis and theories, and make decisions all the time, whether it being the choice of weapon or the next path to take. It has no clear tutorial explaining anything. It requires several playthroughs and many failures to even understand half of its lore and narrative, as it has multiple hidden endings and many missable pieces of information. Dark Souls is a prime example for environmental storytelling, as it mostly relies on it for delivering its narrative. For me personally, I would consider Dark Souls telling a lore rather than a real story. Pieces of information are scattered all over the world. They are missable, just as entire level segments, which just exist to expand the lore and reward exploring. It foreshadows entire destinations you will pass through later, connecting all of the level segments, in the end, to one big world, with minimal backtracking required. It's a game where the player can get lost looking for answers or just rush through, understanding nothing. And it does all of this on top of brutal but satisfying gameplay.